Hello and welcome to a new chess video. This is the second video that I'm posting online. Today is a very exciting day. It was round one of the 2020 Chess Candidates Tournament. This is a tournament played between 8 of the strongest players in the world. They have played many tournaments over the last year to qualify and to make it into this. The winner of this battle between 8 players 14 rounds, the winner will play Magnus Carlsen, the world champion. And if they beat Magnus next year, they will become the world champion themselves. So it is the most important chess tournament besides the world championship every 2 years. Very high stakes. A lot of work went into this tournament and getting into it. And now we're going to see who will place and qualify for the chance to beat Magnus Carlsen himself next year. We're gonna look at the just one quick highlight, which I thought was the game between Anish Giri as white. He's from the Netherlands, playing against Jan Nepomniachtchi, black, from Russia. The game was very long, and so we're only going to start on move 50 something, where Jan Nepomniachtchi, he had queen versus rook and bishop. The game earlier in the game, White had a bad position. He had to sacrifice his queen and play with the rook and bishop against queen. Now, normally, if you can like put your bishop on b3 and anchor your rook on e3, this is a very easy draw, and probably White can try to play for the win by pushing his h pawn somehow. Although I imagine that it's very complicated and not clear. But the position is really bad for White because his pieces are discoordinated and not anchored by pawns or protecting each other. So they're both unprotected, and they have been for quite a while in this game. And we're starting in the position where the bishop just drops off. Although even previously, basically Black was just chasing these pieces around, and White wasn't able to anchor any of them. So the position we start with is Black wins the bishop, and he's playing with queen against rook and pawns. Now, many of you might look at this position and say, "Oh, this is an easy win. Like, what's there to talk about?" But this is not so. In fact, during the live commentary, even the grandmasters couldn't really agree on whether this was a win or a draw. Um, Jan Gustafsson, for example, looked at this position and immediately said, "Oh, it has to be a draw." But then comments online came in, and people using their computers, and they're like, "Wait, no, 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 no! I think it's a win." Uh, and so it's a very interesting position. It was pretty entertaining for me as a player to see grandmasters disagreeing on things. And so we're going to take a look at what happened and how the game progressed. Rook g5. And so Black just went after the a pawn and won the a pawn, and then came back and started trying to win the h pawn. One question I had was, let's just pretend for a moment that like White doesn't have to lose the a pawn. Would it be a draw in that case? So I'm giving White two free moves. This is just theoretical. Would this position be a draw or a win? Um, I'm trying to win as Black here by using a move that this actually won the game in the real game. Queen d3. This is the strategy that Black is going for. The obvious point is that if you capture, you enter a losing king and pawn endgame because the pawn is just too close. You can try to stop it, but in the end, you can't get there fast enough, and we will queen. So, by the way, you can see that I'm including the commentary on the right, once again, so that you can see how I comment on games, and so that you can comment on your own games in as much detail. So, if you can't take, you just wait as White. And can Black win this position? We're going to try to check White around it, and the whole idea is that we need to put White in zugzwang. If White gets into a position where every move loses a pawn, and this is what happened in the game, then Black will win. But it's very difficult when White has three pawns. Now, without the a pawn, we can put white into zugzwang. But here there's too much of a distraction. And after pawn h5, I believe that this is a draw. Black cannot both blockade this pawn and maybe potentially this pawn while also making progress. So eventually, basically, his queen or his king have to get stuck on the h6 square to block the pawn. And then black just cannot move forward because there's always the threat of the pawn going through and making a queen on its own. This is very hard to assess, by the way. The engine will not really help you that much. The engine just always says, "Oh, black is up a queen, easy win," but then it just shuffles the pieces and doesn't show any actual progress. So even if the computer says this is a win, it might still be a fortress. For example, the line can continue like this. And one other important note here, and this is going to be important in the game, is that if the king gets to e2, it's an automatic draw. Let me just explain why. So if you get this position with the rook on e3 and the pawn on f2, this solid anchored rook with your king in the center, it doesn't matter if you blunder away both the h-pawn and the a-pawn, black cannot make progress. The main point, let me just demonstrate. I'm gonna just take off these pawns. So I know that like I'm blundering the queen there, but let me just show you what I mean here. Okay, we can't do that, so let's wait here. So this is a fortress. Black cannot win this. So basically, you just wait around, and the whole reason why this is a fortress is because the winning idea was queen d3. Oh, sorry. The winning idea in the game was queen d3, so that you could get your king around and penetrate, right? Unfortunately, in this situation, the queen you cannot play queen d3 because then we just trade pawns. Not there. We just trade pawns, and black cannot win this position. So if the king is in the center, queen d3 is not possible. When the king is on g2, though, far away, queen d3 is made possible, and that's exactly what happened in the game. So moving on, the endgame was a little easier because Nepo was able to win the a-pawn right away, and then he could just focus on the king side. But that was just out of curiosity, and it was important to show that because you're going to see many of those ideas play out in the real game. He played queen b1 because if you take, this is already a clear draw, right? The king moves and then you'll anchor your rook. So he had to protect his pawn. He moved out of the way, and now we took. By the way, he had to let go of the threat because if you play rook f4, the king will just improve, and we will take the pawn anyway. So he played rook g3 because he figured he's going to lose the a-pawn regardless. And now he's sort of just waiting. He also has the possibility of pushing this h-pawn. Although if you push it too fast and too far right away, it will just drop off. So queen d5, what's the threat? The threat is e3 check, and then e2, and then we make a lady on e1. So he moves out of the way, and he's trying to go king e2. So one really important moment here is that Giri understood what he needed to do to draw. If he can get his king to e2, and his rook to e3, it is a draw even if he loses the h-pawn. So important moment. Both players realized this motif, and so black prevented him from going there. This is a really nice trick. Absolutely genius. The commentators were like going crazy over this move, and so was I. The whole point is it's a little trap, right? And Nepo played the best move, queen h5. Now, how many of you would take this pawn and not win the game? So king e2 is a draw. Sorry, king f1 is a draw because there's no good way of stopping king e2. If you stop king e2, we still get into the center. And remember, you want to play that queen d3 move. And like we pointed out earlier, it doesn't work if the king is in the center. So this is actually a draw. The rook will just go back and forth between these two. And the black pieces, both the queen and the king, cannot penetrate. So rook g3, setting a little trap, wanting black to take the pawn, was a very, very nice trap by Giri. and even nicer on the Pomnishi's part of just not accepting it. Now he just makes a waiting move. By the way, if you try running for the center, you always get blocked out. So there's no point in trying to run to the center right now. As long as black keeps the king from coming to the center, he maintains winning chances. So now he returns to this idea of a check, and he activates his king. We're going to go through this a little faster. He activates his king. And now the next phase of this endgame is to put white in zugzwang. Once again, zugzwang is a position where white has no useful moves, and every move loses something. And so you're basically going to make white run out of moves here. So he's making sure that the king never gets to these two squares. Again, if he gets to those two squares, it's a draw. And now he finds this really nice idea of if he can get his king to h5 and attack the pawn with his king, then black's defenses will be too stretched, and actually this is how white will end up in zugzwang. You'll see how that works in just a moment. So he plays rook g3, cutting the king, not letting the king go, and now he just makes a waiting move. And this is the first time of many where white is in zugzwang. White has no good moves. So in the game, he just played rook h3 and allowed the king to go. But there's no other way. There's no way to stay on the file in a useful way. So for example, if you just move your king, trying to wait with your king, queen f1 is an easy win. Now we can't defend the pawn in any good way. If we play rook g2, this becomes a very trivial win. We're going to activate our king. First, this is both a waiting move, and it's also putting black in zugzwang again. You have to move, so you can't move the rook because then the f2 pawn drops. You can't move the pawn because it drops on h6. And when you move the king, you lose the pawn to a check. And if you moved your king even this way, you'd still lose your pawn with checks. So this final position is a zugzwang. Every move white makes is a losing move. So the white player saw this, and he figured that rook h3 was a better try to hold the game, and maybe if he gets lucky, he can push that pawn forward. But the king ends up on h5. Now he goes back. That's the only move. If you check, obviously the pawn hangs. So after rook h3, you'll notice that now white's in a position where everything's defended, but white can't move anything. So he's holding everything, but he's going to enter a situation where he has to move, and he can't. So queen b1 was the move, a really nice move where white finds himself in zugzwang. And so at this point, he just gave up the pawn. And once the pawn goes, the rest is very easy. And actually, the rest of the moves were blitzed out in the Pomnishi, and I was watching this live. Nepomniachtchi already saw this queen d3 idea from way in the beginning of the endgame. So by the time they got here, he just played out every move immediately. This was a really nice little trap that Giri set. If you go king e5, because your idea, by the way, is to go like this. If you go to king e5 right away, pawn f3 at least complicates things. And now, basically, black has to do a lot of work to win the game again. Like, good luck finding out whether this is a win, a draw, or whatnot. Once again, you end up in the situation where the rook is trying to create a fortress. So not easy at all. This is what happened in the game, though. Just made some waiting moves, and in the end, black played queen d3, and white resigned. Very fascinating game between the two players. I think many of us will lose this quickly on the white side, and probably win this quickly as black because of inaccuracies. But it's a really entertaining and really instructive moment when you see this in high-level play, because they put up really good defense and really good offense on both sides. And they really show the technique necessary to win these really difficult positions. Um, the most important uh, aspects of this game were keeping your queen active, checking from all over the board, and creating a pathway for the king to enter the position. So the reason you're playing queen d3 is to make a path for the king. And then the final crux was that we have to find ways. Oops, we have to find ways of putting. Let me just figure that out for a second. We have to find ways of putting uh, white into zugzwang, and zugzwang is the key to winning here. By the way, I don't think I really explained very well why queen d3 is so winning, because you might ask, what happens if we just wait with rook g3? So let me just point this out really quick before the end of the video. The king crosses, and if we can activate the king, now we can use the king and queen together. So let's say you wait. This is the win. Okay? And now white is in zugzwang. Like if you go here, uh, we will actually that's too slow. We can even just win the pawn like this. And if you try to go for this check, I believe we can already win the pawn on e3, and so that's a winning king and pawn endgame. So after queen d3, just to be very clear, the whole point of queen d3 and why it wins is so that the black king can come around and enter the position. Without this move, the black king cannot. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you got some educational value out of it. I will see you